Natural-born leaders have a knack for getting things done. They do this by surrounding themselves with different specialists who are experts in their respective zones of genius. They also know the importance of engineering the optimal combination of people, processes, and technologies as leverage. Hi, I'm Alicia Butler-Pierre, and you're about to hear from someone who's not only a natural-born leader, but a trailblazer as well. When she didn't see many resources taking action to increase the low representation of female engineers, she knew she had to do something. And she eventually began using some digital event planning technologies to amplify her outreach on a larger scale. And it's paying off. Those once hidden STEM gems are starting to shine through. Young girls can now see who they can one day be. This is season 14, episode 173. Let's start the show.
Welcome to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues of fast-growing businesses. If you're a business owner or operator looking for practical tips and solutions to scaling your business in a sustainable manner, you're in the right place. Now here's your hostess, Alicia Butler-Pierre.
Having a tough time trying to explain ideas over a video conference? Try the Think Smart whiteboard. It's the fastest whiteboard software in the world and allows you to upload flowcharts and write on them while your colleagues are watching remotely. Call us today for a free demo. The number is 1-866-584-6804 or visit us online at getmytablet.com. Now that's smart. Think smart. This episode is brought to you by Equilibria Incorporated, the company behind this podcast where we design business infrastructure for fast-growing small businesses ready to scale. It's season 14, and we're focusing on game-changing technology. And joining us today, also here in Atlanta, Georgia, is Stephanie Espy. Stephanie is the founder and CEO of MathSP, and she's the #1 LinkedIn top voice in education. Her mission is to empower the next generation of STEM leaders by inspiring, mentoring, and coaching them in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, content, and careers. She's also the author of STEM Gems, a book that has now become a movement. And Stephanie's going to tell us all about that, as well as how she's been leveraging Hopin as her technology of choice for creating her online events and programs, and how that's helping to keep the operational heartbeat of her company pumping. So without any further ado, Stephanie, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you so much for having me.
I finally got you on the show. Stephanie, as long as I've known you, and so the podcast is a little over 3 years old now, but I was trying to remember, how long have I known you, Stephanie? It's been at least it's definitely been over 5 years. So maybe 6 or 7 years now at this point.
Count, but I know that you were at one of my very first events. And that was definitely more than 5 years ago.
Yeah. And just so for those who are listening, the way Stephanie and I met each other, I was working with a publicist. And she happened to forward an article to me. And what caught her attention was the fact that you were a chemical engineer. And as I read the article, I thought, I have to meet Stephanie for several reasons. One, of course, because you're also a chemical engineer, but not only that, you're a Black female chemical engineer, and there aren't many of us. And one thing I've always appreciated about information that you share are those kinds of stats. I might be putting you on the spot here, but do you know off the top of your head, what are those stats again for female entrepreneurs?
I know the stats for women in engineering.
Okay, yeah.
The stats specifically for chemical engineering, but women in engineering earning bachelor's degrees is about 19%. And when you zoom in on women of color, or I should say underrepresented women of color, it's about 3%. So you and I, having earned a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, represent 3% of engineers.
Wow.
So,
now, for those who are listening and they may be wondering, what is a chemical engineer? What is a chemical engineer, Stephanie?
So the easy way to say this, explain it, is obviously chemical engineering. This is a combination of chemistry and math. So my two favorite subjects growing up, chemistry and math. So chemical engineering was a natural career path for me. But when I actually start learning more about what chemical engineers do, I like to equate chemical engineering to process design and process engineering,
Mm-hmm.
creating small scale, large scale processes that involve some sort of chemical. So chemical engineers are in every industry. So it's a wide range of things you can do with this degree, but in a very simplistic terms, I would just say we're the brains behind creating and designing a process to go from, a little bit of something to a lot of something, to take
Oh, I
something
love that.
large scale. And anything that involves chemicals, which most things do involve some sort of chemical. And also just thinking about how do you protect the environment? How do you make sure there's nothing hazardous in terms of working with chemicals? Lots of things can really harm the environment and harm animals and plants and everything like that. So a lot of considerations to be made when you're designing these processes. That is sort of how I define what a chemical engineer does. And there's a lot of things like heat and fluids and all sorts of physics and
Mm-hmm.
process design things that happen. So that's what we do. That's what I've done in my past. And I think about my friends who also studied chemical engineering, very similar in terms of just really designing processes.
Yes. As I always like to say, we are the true process engineers because, there are a lot of people out there that use that term, Stephanie, and they're not really chemical engineers. I won't even go there, but it always, it's a personal pet peeve of mine when I see people using that term process engineer so loosely. But check this out, everybody. Well, first, actually, before I even tell them about just how amazingly brilliant you are, Stephanie, I just realized, did I ask you to give a stat about female entrepreneurs instead of female engineers? Is that what I said?
I think you said entrepreneurs, but I gave you the stat on engineering. Really sure what
I
it is.
meant engineer. I meant engineer. See, I'm telling you, it's been a very long day. So forgive me for that. But for those of you who are listening right now, let me again just break down just how brilliant Stephanie is. So she has a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from MIT, a master's degree in chemical engineering from the University of California at Berkeley, and an MBA from Emory. Stephanie, wow. Now, I'm curious, how long did you work in industry before you pursued your MBA?
That's a hard question to answer only because I count like internships as part of like working in industry.
Yeah,
Uh,
of course.
so, if you had to tally it all up between all the different, because I had internships as early as high school, really, but definitely all throughout college and when I was in graduate school. So before my MBA, I had worked for, let's say, 3 years or so. And let me tell you how I decided to make the transition. So when I was at Berkeley studying chemical engineering, I was introduced to a program called MOT, which stands for Management of Technology. And it was a joint program between the business school and the engineering school. And I'm not sure how exactly I heard about the program, but I heard about it some kind of way. And then I decided I was going to to actually go for it. It was a certificate program, so it's not like I earned an MBA or anything, but it was nice to sort of mingle and mix with the business school students or have them to mingle and mix with the engineering students. So somehow I decided to take the classes that I need to take in order to achieve that certificate, earn that certificate. And that was my first experience to business, anything business. That was like the introduction. And my first class was just unbelievably foreign. It was very different from an engineering class, and just the way that engineering classes are structured and the way that they're run. It's a lot of lectures, a lot of note taking, a lot of taking tests and doing a lot of problem sets and things like that, where the business school was almost, it felt like the complete opposite. It felt like being in another world. It was a lot more project-based work, Of course, in engineering, I had my lab work. So I was doing projects in the lab, but this was more like kind of working in teams and doing
Right.
presentations and, case studies. And it was just different. And so anyway, that was my introduction to business. So it was sometime in those years that I started thinking about, this MBA, I wonder how that would add to my skill set. And I remember talking to my dad about it, who is also an engineer, but also has always thought I was a great leader. I had done lots of leadership things when I was growing up. I was in high school, I was a class president of my senior class. And I'd always been sort of a leader in my high school. So he always felt like I was a strong leader in that business school, and those skills would, add to my life in a lot of different ways. So he encouraged me to consider the MBA. And so at that point, I was like, should I do this whole like PhD MBA thing? Or, it was like a lot of decisions to make at that point. But that's sort of how the idea of getting a business degree even came on my radar. Prior to that, I had no interest in business and no interest in entrepreneurship whatsoever. And that experience really changed that for me. And so shortly after I finished Berkeley, I took a couple years and did some very interesting things. We can talk about that. Probably it's another conversation. And then I decided to apply to business school. So I did have a break in between Berkeley and then applying and attending Emory. And I had some very unique work experiences and experiences in general in that time that really had nothing to do with chemical engineering. But it was it definitely prepared me for what was to come. And then while I was at Emory working my MBA, I did a internship at Merck, which at the time was like my dream job, my dream company to work for.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the internship, I accepted a full-time offer from Merck and worked full-time at Merck for, I think, 2+ years, and then eventually left Merck to focus on my business. So that's sort of how that happened.
And it's so interesting hearing you say, Stephanie, that you were doing work that had nothing to do with chemical engineering, but it probably did, because engineering sets a foundation for critical thinking, which I know is what your company MathSP is all about, is teaching those critical thinking skills, problem solving skills. And I tell people all the time when they look at me like, how on earth did you go from chemical engineering to business infrastructure? First of all, what the heck is business infrastructure? But I always tell people it's all about process. And I treasure my chemical engineering background so much because it taught me how to think. I know. It was just starting to get good, right? Well, there's more where that came from. To listen to the full interview, be sure to click the link in the description box below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell so that you'll know when our next episode drops. Until then, keep operating smoothly.
Join us next week for another episode of Business Infrastructure with Alicia Butler-Pierre.